Hi, my name is Sharon Ellison, and I would like to share with you one of my own stories about when I moved from being quite defensive to being able to ask a truly non-defensive question. I went into a tire store one night and was needing new tires, and my family was going on a trip that weekend, and I was very delighted to see somebody walk up to help me right away. I call him George, and as we were talking, he was recommending a different kind of radial tire than I usually buy, so I was asking him some questions about why he preferred the other tire. And every time I asked a question, he said, "You don't need to know that." Well, I was not happy with that answer, and I didn't have time to go get my tires somewhere else, so I walked outside and used a few words that I won't repeat here, and then I decided that I needed to go back in and actually practice what I teach. So I walked up to him and I asked him, "Do you believe that I don't need to know about the tires I'm buying?" And he did something that I've found that people will often do when I ask a non-defensive question. He kind of backed up and he squinted at me. And it took me a long time to figure out why people would back up and squint, but I finally realized it's like they suddenly realize you live on a different planet than they do, and they have to adjust their telescope in order to see you. And what's really going on is that they're actually realizing that what you were experiencing in that interaction was completely different from what they were experiencing. And so when he backed up and he squinted at me for a minute, and then all of a sudden he said, "Oh no. It's not that you don't need to know about the tires you're buying. It's just that when I taught mechanics at the community college, my students never respected my knowledge." Why is this man telling me about his college teaching career? I think it's because when I ask a non-defensive question, often as soon as the other person drops their defenses, they will tell me either why they got defensive in the first place, or they will take their next step really, truly, in personal growth. And I think he was telling me that he thought that I was like his college students and that I wasn't respecting his knowledge. When I walked out of the store, he followed me out the door and down the sidewalk, shaking my hand and giving me his card and saying, "Please, please, if you ever need tires again, come back." And he almost sounded more like a little kid saying, "Do you want to come over and play again?" than he did like a man saying, you know, "I'd like you to come back and get more tires here some other time." And when I stop and think about that story now, even though it's more than a decade ago, I realize that if I hadn't asked that man that question, I would still, maybe 10 years later, have flashes when I would think back and be angry at him. And I often will ask a group of people, did any of you think that it was a gender issue that he was telling me I didn't need to know about the tires I was buying? And usually at least 50 or 60% of the audience or more of the men and the women will say that they thought it was probably a gender issue. And one of the things that I love about the power of the non-defensive question is that it not only can prompt another person to drop their defenses, but it can give the person who's asking the question new insights. And I had an insight that I still work with that for me is incredibly profound. And that is when I didn't like his behavior, I attached the meaning of that behavior to the most obvious difference between him and me. And he was a man and I was a woman. So I thought, you know, this is the man telling the little woman she doesn't need to know about the tires. And in that moment, I realized that we are reinforcing prejudice all over the place. When every single time, I don't want to say every single time, but when so often, when we see something we don't like in a person, we attach it to the obvious difference. In this case, he was a man, I was a woman. If we don't like a child's behavior, we may see them as too privileged or spoiled. But we begin then to reinforce stereotypes in a way that I think is dangerous. And in my case, now, when I think about George, I feel so tender toward him instead of feeding my prejudices.